Do you know that Bal Gangadhar Tilak was arrested because he wrote a newspaper? Greetings. In this lesson, we'll be sharing with you information about the print and censorship in colonial India. We'll be learning about the censorship in India pre revolt, post revolt, and the public's response to the same.
To get an overview of what we'll be learning, let's look at the important events in the history of censorship of India in the form of a timeline.
Before 1798, the East India Company was not too concerned about censorship, and the 1820s marked the starting of the control of press freedom with the Calcutta Supreme Court passing certain regulations.
In 1835, Governor General Bentinck agreed to revise press laws and hence increasing more press freedom. In 1877, the Statesman newspaper was founded.
In 1878, the Vernacular Act was passed, and in 1908, Bal Gangadhar Tilak was imprisoned.
Okay, so what happened pre revolt? Before 1798, the East India Company was not too concerned with censorship, but strangely, its early measures to control printed matter were against Englishmen who were critical of the company's misrule. The company was worried that these criticisms could be used by Englishmen in England to attack the trade in India. It is in the 1820s that the Calcutta Supreme Court passed certain regulations to control press freedom, and the company began to encourage papers that celebrated British rule. The first picture portrays Governor General Bentinck, and in 1835, Governor General Bentinck was faced with petitions by editors and vernacular newspapers. At last, the governor agreed to revise press laws. In the second picture, you see Thomas Macaulay, a liberal colonial official who made new rules that restored previous freedoms.
Let's look at the situation after the revolt of 1857. The perception of press freedom shifted with the uprising of 1857. Angry Englishmen urged that the native press be suppressed. The colonial authorities started considering strict control measures as local newspapers started to take a long nationalist stance. The Vernacular Press Act, which was modeled after the Irish press laws, was passed in 1878. It gave the government broad authority to restrict articles and commentaries published in the local press. The government began regularly monitoring the provincially published vernacular publications at this point. When a story was determined to be seditious, the newspaper was warned, and if the warning was disregarded, the press might be seized and the printing equipment gets taken.
Now, let's take a look at what the public's response was to all these regulations. Despite repressive measures, nationalist newspapers grew in numbers in all parts of India. They reported on colonial misrule and encouraged nationalist activities. Attempts to suppress nationalist criticisms provoked violent protests. This in turn led to a cycle of persecution and protests. For example, when Punjab revolutionaries were deported in 1907, Bal Gangadhar Tilak wrote with great sympathy about them in his paper The Kesari. This led to his imprisonment in 1908, which provoked widespread protests all over India.
Did you know the government had trouble locating people to serve as editors of papers that were loyal? When approached, Sanders, editor of The Statesman, which was established in 1877, questioned him politely how much he would be compensated for losing his freedom. The Friend of India declined a government subsidy out of concern that doing so would make it subject to orders from the government.
The power of the printed word is most often seen in the way governments seek to regulate and suppress print. The colonial government kept continuous track of all books and newspapers published in India and passed numerous laws to control the press. During the First World War, under the Defense of India rule, 22 newspapers had to furnish securities. Of these, 18 shut down rather than comply with government orders. The Sedition Committee reported under Rowlett in 1919, further strengthening controls that led to imposition of penalties on various newspapers. At the outbreak of the Second World War, the Defense of India Act was passed, allowing censoring of reports of war-related topics. All reports about the Quit India movement came under this purview. In August 1942, about 90 newspapers were suppressed.
Hence, concluding the chapter, there is no doubt that print culture was one of the most important driving forces during the freedom struggle and was so widely popularized that it is still used today.